original story of Pokemon is far different than we ever knew, with giants battling Arceus in a war the second he was born. The Distortion world once being a place where Pokemon other than Giratina lived, in a time where even Palkia rampaged as it attempted to dethrone Arceus. Tidbits of these stories have made their way into the canon lore of Pokemon, but their deeper, complete versions have been long hidden from us until now. As with the assistance of a very special Boltoy, I can now bring to you a story that begins before the creation of Arceus and ends with the war that created the world of Pokemon. Howdy there, I'm Krillix, and today we have something very, very different because I did not write today's script. Technically, this isn't even a script at all, but instead a written document and story digging into exactly what I talked about in the intro to this video, which is the beginning of Pokemon, the original stories, and the giants that existed when Arceus was born, for lack of a better term. And Boltoy, I've talked about a number of times on this channel, and I strongly believe their articles are worth reading as they go through a very, very well thought out, in-depth analysis with evidence that allows us to understand Pokemon better and its connection to the real world. I have not read this ahead of time whatsoever, as I've looked at other articles that they've had and enjoyed what they had there, while also just making sure that I can bring to you the same excitement and the same level of insights that I'm able to add to this. Not live, because this is a recording, of course, but I think you know what I mean. So let's begin with Boltoy's first words, or rather Keyskam's first words, as they are called on their proper article website, and I will leave a link to that in the description and the comment section below, as they start with: the creation of the universe and the events immediately following are topics firstly explored in Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. Kanalef City's library fills us with stories written in the most ancient times, and the more we proceed in our playthrough, the more we understand the legends are rooted in reality. This is an aspect of the setting that was extensively thought out by developers. Confidential documents leaked to the public in 2024 show the creative process involved in-depth research on the cosmogonies from all over the world, and the script was revised multiple times before the final draft. In retrospect, many of the more obscure passages of the Legendarium can be clarified by looking at those early takes. In fact, we may never know how much of the corpus ended up on the cutting room floor due to incompatibility with the established scenario, and how much was simply left unspoken for us to draw lines between the dots. Effectively, what's canonical lore and what is just lost to time, things that we'll never know and we have to make our own conclusions of. All we can do then is make our way through contextual and textual fragments to reconstruct the mosaic. Myths, after all, wouldn't be as such if we simply had all the answers. The most important text to navigate in the vast sea of cosmogony is undeniably the original story, a tale recounting of the very beginning of creation up until the disappearance of God from the lives of men. We will use this myth as a compass to establish a first and solid sequence of events in the early universe, which will serve as an essential cornerstone to all future analyses. The narration has its start before anything had a form or a name. In the legend's very first strophe, I'm not sure how to say that word, it is described the state of the world before the original one, raised from a primordial egg. In English, we are given, in the beginning, there was only a churning turmoil of chaos. At the heart of chaos, where all things became one, appeared an egg. Having tumbled from the vortex, the egg gave rise to the original one. The Japanese text is a little bit different. In the beginning, there was only a vortex of chaos. Everything was blended together. In the center, an egg appeared. The egg split over and fell, and the first being was born. Originally, only a turmoil of chaos existed. The Japanese term used for this state is uneri, the equivalent for vortex, specifically describing wave motion. We can infer this chaotic singularity to be somehow fluid, which is why the text then states the egg split over and fell, due to the undulation in the chaos. Sounds like an egg on a waterbed, just send it way off into space is what that sounds like. Just let Arceus or somebody else jump on one side of the waterbed and send the egg off. I'm sorry. But back to Boltoy's words. Earlier versions of the script describe the egg falling only when the vortex ceased its swirling after long time passed. But this was likely changed as the notion would be incompatible with the concept of time, not having emerged by this point. Moreover, it would have deprived the story of its peculiarity. While it shares some similarities with Shintoism creation myth, which is something I've talked about in some of my most recent videos, with both having the world's primordial state being sunk in chaos, the tale diverges from real-life folklore, imagining this phase in motion. The traditional myth has movement as the sprouting force for creation, but this is only incidentally true in Pokemon. Chaos has always swirled on itself. If not a sudden and inexplicable stop, what was then that actually caused the egg to appear and hatch? The key detail to answer this is found in the third verse. While localization claims all things become one at the center of the turmoil, the original version is clearer in affirming that everything was blended together even before the egg's sudden appearance. Given only the vortex of chaos existed back then, it's evidence everything, quote-unquote, was mixed in its folds. The act of swirling, amalgamating all in a single thing. This everything has to be taken in the most literal sense. In Pokemon Platinum, obtaining Arceus through event distributions will reward us with a hiker appearing in Kanalov Library. The man is particularly interested in the stories about creation and will be content to fill us with his current understanding of the ancient texts. The way I see it, our world began when the spirit within people was born. When that spirit came to be, there followed awareness about the world. A Pokemon is said to have shaped this world. Could that Pokemon be the physical form of the original spirit? Once again, we have the Japanese text that Boltoy does give us, stating, "I think the beginning of the world was the moment the spirit within people sprouted. The spirit was born and began to recognize the world. If that's the case, can the Pokemon that made the world be thought as the embodiment of the spirit?" According to our lore hunter, the starting point of the universe is to search in the spirit within people. The term used here is kokoro, which can be translated as heart or mind. That sounds really familiar when we start to think of the Lake Guardians and how without them spirit wouldn't exist, but I'm sure we're going to get there later with this text. It generally refers to the spiritual sphere of oneself. And it's the same word used to describe the spirit of the Lake Trio. There it is right there. If I waited 5 seconds, he already says it. And it's the same word used to describe the spirit of the Lake Trio will later bring to the world. Note that while localization draws a line between the two concepts, labeling the primordial spirit as the quote-unquote original one, this is absent in Japanese. The hiker suggests the first being, quote-unquote, born out of the egg was the physical manifestation of the spirit within people's hearts. The implication would be humans existed before the universe was created, and indeed, everything points out to this realization. The quote-unquote everything the chaos was composed of was the literal amalgamation of each parts of the universe that will later be made of. Space and time, stars and planets, mountains and seas, plants, Pokemon, and even humans all existed since the very beginning. Their essences intermingled with one another in one great singularity. So if I'm understanding this properly, it's effectively saying that everything has a spirit, everything has energy, which there's a lot of energy within the world of Pokemon that has been shown to just derive from one singular form of energy and is shared and transformed between humans, Pokemon, and otherwise, that is what existed at the beginning of time as a singular form until eventually Arceus was kind of blown into existence. Don't say that word, that was not the right word to use, but I think you understand what I mean, that when that spirit was fully embodied and realized, that everything burst from it, if I'm understanding this properly. Leaked scripts even had all these things directly coming from the egg upon its shattering. Others had Pokemon and humans die upon their birth in absence of a world outside. The spirit within people also existed in this mixture, and it was its nature to recognize the world. But in order to do so, you first have to alienate yourself from it. It was this thought, the wish of people's minds to exist as their own, to ultimately break the all-encompassing turmoil of chaos. And so, the craving for individuality led the spirit to assume a concrete shape, an egg from which emerged the first being, from which all lives will eventually sprout in return. This makes sense to me because individualism is a very, very big thing, especially in Japan. You can look at it honestly, any human being wants to be seen as individual, not to be seen as a cog in a machine or another stroke of a pen brush or paintbrush onto a piece of art, right? You want to be seen as who you are. You want to stand out from the rest. And I think that is effectively what's being said here, that by wanting to be separated, to be seen as the individual, everything broke apart. And it was the collective will that allowed this to happen. The next chapter is called World's First Heartbeat. It will not come as a shock that the quote-unquote first being was none other than the mythical Pokemon Arceus, with a name derived from the Greek arche, beginning, and Zeus. The Pokédex rightly refers to the alpha Pokemon, creation Pokemon, which is what it's called in its Japanese direct translation, as the one who molded the newborn universe. What is more open to debate is whether the original one has always looked like the Arceus we see in the games. After all, one might expect the embodiment of humanity's wishes to be more anthropomorphic, running around with 2 legs and 2 arms, in appearance rather than taking the shape of a quadrupedal mammal. It is told in mythology that this Pokemon was born before the universe even existed. It is said to have emerged from an egg in place where there was nothing, then shaped the world. According to the Legends of Sinnoh, this Pokemon emerged from an egg and shaped all there is in this world. Entries describe the demiurge in the act of shaping creation with its 1,000 arms. Leaked profile similarly confirms it was supposed to have 4 eyes in its original design. The image clearly alludes to depictions of Buddha with multiple hands in representation of supreme enlightenment. So we can imagine these arms, quote unquote, whether looking like actual limbs or being more metaphorical extensions, to manifest when the entity draws its powers at the fullest. So basically that means when Arceus wants to go all out, 1,000 arms could literally burst from its body, which is pretty freaking sick. Actually, I think the terminal montage video literally shows that, which is even better. Indeed, Junichi Masuda always remarked how comparing the creature to a quote-unquote god wasn't proper. While the foreign building in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl features a portrayal of the original one different from its usual design, seemingly in standing position. Finally, Legends Arceus confirmed the one we see in game to merely be an avatar of the all-encompassing deity. It is described in mythology as the Pokemon that shaped the universe with its 1,000 arms. I bestow my blessing, and I bestow upon thee a part of myself. I would walk this world together with thee. Show me how it appeareth in thine eyes. The Japanese term used here is bunshin, which can be translated as avatar, but has also the specific connotation of a body resulted from the split of another one into multiple parts. In other words, the primordial deity eventually divided its body into multiple pieces, resulting in the Arceus we know today. If this entails a diminishing of its force is another matter entirely, as the Pokemon as we know it still retains the ability to further split itself indefinitely at the cost of exhausting power rather than matter from its own body. At the very least, however, we can be sure for the contingent avatar to be different from the transcendent deity. So effectively, the Arceus we know is different from the original one that we probably saw at the beginning of Legends Arceus. Makes sense. Coherently, the text engraved on the mind plate describes the original one resting alone before the universe came to be. In English, it states, the original one breathed alone before the universe came. In Japanese, before the universe was born, the being itself rested alone. So we have something that matches. Other than noticing the connotation of quote-unquote breathing is also an artifact of localization, as strictly speaking, nothing to breathe existed yet. The original one is addressed as Sonomono, which can be rendered as the being itself, or the very being. It is then especially fitting for its name in early builds to have been Aus, A-U-S, from the Proto-Indo-European aus, meaning to shine in relation to dawn. What could be more obscure is the inscription on the insect plate, which, hold on, to shine in relation to dawn, the first light, what is it, God said let there be light. Literally, it is the light itself. Okay, that's actually pretty sick if that's the way that that's meant to be understood. But onto the insect plate. In English, where all creation was born, that is the being's place of origin. In Japanese, the place where the universe was born is the being itself, place of beginning. Apparently, the place where the universe was born, which is to say where the original one started its active creation, is the same place where the god itself came to be. In other words, the core of the turmoil of chaos. In all likelihood, this refers to the Hall of Origin. The original name for the deity's seat is Space of Beginning, and while not using the same kanji for space, this has the same connotation of the place/space of beginning, engraved on the plate. Indeed, Legends Arceus depicts the Hall of Origin with the same alchemic glyph we can also see on the Mystery Stage during the Sinjo Ruins event in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. According to Cynthia, the stage itself is meant to represent the place Arceus has to stand on in order to create a new world. Hold on. A place Arceus has to stand on in order to create a new world. So, for this being to create something new, it's almost like an alchemist circle where it stands center, and from there all life expands out from it, from this original spot, almost like it's drawing upon energy, which makes sense because it's just an avatar. According to an ancient document, time, space, and antimatter, or what combined we call the world, shall be born when Arceus stands on the Mystery Stage. We can then infer the glyph was also necessary for the original one to shape the universe in its beginning. If the process was similar to what we witnessed in Sinjo, then other entities played a crucial role in its proper outcome. In the act of materializing a new legendary dragon, many unknown gather around Arceus, making the actual symbol appear on this stage. The true nature of these Pokemon, the unknown, is never spoken in the games, but whether they are born out of the original one's 1,000 hands drifting apart from the main body, or simply out of the spirit's creative force, they surely are primordial creatures, paralleling the Hebrew tradition of the monotheistic god bringing the world into existence through the power of words. These symbol Pokemon are the very letters Arceus wrote the universe with, like the code of the games, effectively. Contrary to Abrahamic religions, however, the original one isn't responsible for creation ex nihilo, nihilo, whatever the word is. As previously addressed, everything existed in the vortex of chaos since the very beginning. All the god had to do was to separate the parts, allowing to set them apart from the collectivity and stand as individuals. This is what the text on the Pixie Plate alludes to when claiming the original one is in all things and at the same time in none. In English, it states, the original one is in all things, the original one is nowhere at all. In Japanese, it states, the being itself is everywhere, the being itself is not everywhere. The spirit sought a physical form and materialized in the original one. In order for other things to exist, the deity had to split its own body and externalize the everything from itself. This is ultimately why the Arceus we see has to be a mere fraction of the whole. It is the conditio sine qua non. Wow, the what? For the world to stand on its own. The condition of nothing? I don't know how to translate that. The conditio sine qua non. For the world to stand on its own. This process of gradual disaggregation is also subtly referenced by the Earth Plate. When the universe was created, its shards became this plate, and in Japanese it states, when the universe was born, those shards became plates. Arceus's plates are artifacts as ancient as the universe itself, and according to the old lore, they were made by quote-unquote shards, resulting from the world's creation. The subject of this shattering isn't made clear through the text, but the idea is once again the same. For everything to exist, something has to be broken. You're kind of hitting the Beerus before creation comes destruction type levels, with these shards remaining as proofs of the act. It is then safe to assume what was fractured in the first place was none other than Arceus's original body, something which was later confirmed explicitly by Volo, the tale of a brave soul who, together with the Pokemon at his side, went on a journey to search for the fragments of an all-encompassing deity. But now, let us discuss the fragments. They must surely be the plates. It's worth noticing Legends Arceus recontextualized the plate's origin with the introduction of the blank plate. Its original name uses blank quote-unquote specifically in the sense of something quote-unquote brand new or otherwise unused, meaning this is the shape those items had in the beginning. That's a sick inference, actually. As we'll see, the essences of types, or Pokemon types, were only later bestowed to the relics. Now we know they were all originally imbued with normalcy, mirroring the creator's typology. Because that makes sense, Arceus has to use the plates in order to transform itself into bug or fire type, water, so on and so forth. Cosmogony's Bedrock. The original story proceeds by detailing the creation of two beings ruling over time and space, same as the text engraved on the icicle plate. This obviously refers to Dialga, the temporal Pokemon, and Palkia, the spatial Pokemon. As the Pokédex stresses multiple times, those are the creatures from which time and space firstly arose, a notion further reiterated by the Hiker, who explicitly concludes the two stemmed from Arceus at the beginning of the universe, other than by the engraving on the icicle plate stating this. Within the newborn spirit, time and space were intertwined as one. And with Dialga, it states a Pokemon spoken of in legend. It is said that time began moving when Dialga was born, whereas Palkia's dex entry states a legendary Pokemon of Sinnoh. It is said that space becomes more stable with Palkia's every breath. The spirit came to be, and from it time and space were born. That seems to point to legendary Dialga, the Pokemon of time, and Palkia, the Pokemon of space. And they lead back to Arceus, the Pokemon that made them arise, as the Hiker does state. And then the icicle plate helps us even more, stating in English, two beings of time and space were set free from the original one, with the Japanese version directly stating two avatars of time and space were released from the thing itself. I, again, love knowing here that Dialga and Palkia, with direct translation, are just the avatars, which would also explain why we get to have multiple of them. That there would be multiple Dialga and Palkia, and that if something were to happen to them, that's why they can be recreated. The true god of time and space are not obtainable to us, just like the original one wouldn't be. Boltoy continues, stating, this led many fans to assume the two legendary Pokemon to be quote-unquote children of Arceus, but this is only partially correct. Both the plate and the original story address Dialga and Palkia as Bunshin, avatars, in the same vein as Arceus is a fraction of its complete self. In other words, the original one's first division brought the gods of space and time into existence, and they aren't less close to the ancestral deity than Arceus itself. They are, in all respects, aspects of the original one on the same metaphysical level of the alpha Pokemon. The only difference is the latter conserved the ability to split itself in more entities. So, effectively that means Dialga, Palkia, and I guess that would also mean Giratina are all on the same level as Arceus, but Arceus has the ability to split itself further, meaning that the one being that they all come from is not like a greater god of time, but rather just directly to the original one. Again, I keep saying if I understand it properly, I'm going to try not to keep saying that just so that I don't sound like a broken record, but bear with me if I keep saying that. An interesting observation can be made looking at the use of Hiki in the icicle plate original text. This is a particle normally used to count small animals, and attached to Dialga and Palkia gives an idea of how immensely powerful the first being was as a whole. In English, from itself, two beings the original one did make. Time started to spin, space began to expand. In Japanese, we have the first being made two avatars. Time began to flow, space began to expand. Earlier versions of the original myth even describe the process of Arceus, I assume is how it's spelled, A-U-S again, dividing its body in two halves, namely La and Aya. It's actually Aya and Aya, so ignore my pronunciation for half of this video, please. From contractions of the Diamond and Pearl, giving the games their titles, as the gods' left and right sides differed to begin with. Developers' annotations, however, clarify the difference to be conceptual more than physical. It symbolized how the original one truly encompassed everything. From its left came La, which represented its male aspect and that of Pokemon. From its right came Aya, the female sphere, and that of humans. The general idea of a first entity dividing its body to actualize life remained in the finalized games, although the figures of Dialga and Palkia were deeply revisited. The connection between Aya and humanity run once far deeper, mankind originating as offspring of the quote-unquote Great Mother, counterbalancing Pokemon as spawn of the Great Father, La. Even their role in the larger cosmology was only set at a later time. Originally, La and Aya were conceived as gods of light and darkness respectively. This immediately makes me think, my most recent video, other than this one of course, was me digging into Mewtwo, and I called Mewtwo the perfect creation or the child of man and Pokemon, because that's effectively what it is in so many different versions that it exists in. And by combining man and Pokemon again, it created a creature that was more powerful than anything found in nature. So I wonder if we could take this idea and apply that to Mewtwo in some capacity. It's only from a second version of the myth that time entered the stage, only in relation to Palkia. According to internal documents, Ea was conceived as a god representing femininity and the moon, as opposed to La, which embodied masculinity and the sun. This is a recurring dichotomy in Japanese culture, our satellite often associated to gentler dispositions expected from traditional female roles, while the star shining bright in the sky is usually accompanied by strong and energetic male archetypes. This may be why they were conceived as deities of light and darkness in the first place. Taking that in mind, La is described with an inclination towards anger, but also carrying the stability of a diamond. It represented agriculture and man-made things, but also drought brought by its rays. Ea, on the other hand, bore a disposition of sadness, a more reflective counterpart to its brother, and hence favoring the transformation, birthing a pearl, with the idea of time flowing as an ever-changing river. It must have been natural to associate the dark goddess with the concept of time. In one successive draft, space was even given to La as a result, yet this take had its issues. This image of Palkia was supposed to evoke movement, but its qualities were also intrinsically linked to tradition. Ea was a deity of hunting and nature, of cold weather, freezing the crops. It was even associated explicitly with Ainu people, while the modern Japanese befitted La's domain. The absurdity of a god of time rejecting progress must have been why Palkia was eventually switched to embody space instead, leaving the other dimension to Dialga. This, of course, made some of the attributes originally conceived for one deity to not be attributed to the other, particularly regarding the Pokemon's individual characterization when it comes to anger and sadness. In any case, you can argue quote-unquote light and quote-unquote darkness still pertain to the modern incarnation of the deities, at least from a metaphorical perspective, which, yeah, you could then say like, oh, what is it, Palkia. I don't know why I forgot its name so quickly. Palkia. It's the space Pokemon. Space is naturally dark. That makes sense. And since Dialga is the opposite, shine bright like a diamond, baby. I don't know what else to say. It's pretty simple. After all, our perception of time strictly relies on light. Our capability to put events in order closely depends on when photons meet our eyes. Okay, Boltoy put it a lot more eloquently and way cooler than I did. All while space expands towards infinity beyond what we can see, a void of darkness, its only witness. Both from a narrative and from a thematical standpoint, these changes worked for the better. With space and time, the first proper dimensions were also ready to emerge. According to Palkia, or its Pokédex entry, the dragon lives in the gap between spatial dimensions. The Japanese term for this is Kyukan no Hazama, which can be roughly translated as between spaces. This is the same construction later used in Generation 5 to describe the inter-dream zone, or between dreams, Yume no Hazama, with the latter being the region between the dream world and the waking realm. We can imagine Palkia's between spaces to be a boundary domain dividing our world from a proper space world. It is said to live in a gap in the spatial dimension parallel to ours. It appears in mythology. Although the Pokédex doesn't indulge us on the place Dialga resides, Pokemon Legends Arceus' official website confirmed the existence of a time world. I think there was something else that confirmed that, not just the website, so I can back that up. This dimension is described as a place in which the flow of time is irregular, constantly traveling in different directions. This is ultimately what allows the Pokemon to move freely in the folds of time, being able to reach past and future ages at its will. That also makes me think of the Pokemon Arceus movie where Dialga sends Ash and the team into the past to stop Arceus and its rampage, which then explains with this contextualization why Dialga is able to do that to help stop Arceus, because they are from the same original being and they would then exist on the same level of power.
And while the locution between times, Jika no Hazama, is never used in the games, it is in Dialga's leaked design file, even without the confirmation, the existence of a region on the edge of dimensions for the realm of time would simply be a logical inference. So again, even without leak information, it just makes sense that there would be a realm of time, which I think we get in Pokemon Journeys anyway. So this might have, I believe this article was written before this, the Pokemon Journeys whole episode happened regarding that. Now, the flow of time is said to be in constant flux in the world where Origin Form Dialga resides, always moving in different directions and different speeds. This Pokemon completely controls the flow of time. It uses its power to travel at will through the past and the future. The unending and confused flow stems from the heart of the Dialga itself, whose beats are the source of the vast river of time which started to run at the dawn of ages. As for Palkia, the deity of the spatial realm is described to expand space with its mere breath. Like Laventon poetically puts it, it broke down the wall of the world with its birth, casting a limitless sky that spanned to infinity. Dialga is also described as a legendary Pokemon of Sinnoh. It is said that time flows when Dialga's heart beats directly in its Pokedex. This Pokemon is revered as a deity in Hisuian legend. The birth of Dialga was what caused the vast river of time to begin flowing in our world. And parallel to this, with more of Palkia's Pokedex entries, a legendary Pokemon of Sinnoh, it is said that space becomes more stable with Palkia's every breath. The birth of Palkia was what caused the walls of our world to disappear, creating a sky that spans for infinity. The space world enlarged around the god's essence. The sheer force of Palkia's distorting powers allowed its domain to cross the boundaries of dimensions. Necessarily, this also included the time world. When the two realms intermingled, space-time was brought into the new universe, and that intersection served as the basis for the dimension we live in. The material world in which both time and space coexist coherently. Its total control over the boundaries of space enabled it to transport itself to faraway places or even other dimensions. But how could two aspects so different from one another generate a reality so harmonious? How could none of them have prevailed on the other, or at least attempted to do so? From the original story to the Draco Plate, all sources point to the fact 3 more beings were born in order to bind space-time as one. From itself again, 3 living things the original one didn't make. And in Japanese it states, furthermore, it produced 3 lives from its body. The Draco Plate in English says 3 beings were born to bind time and space, and in Japanese, the being itself produced 3 Pokemon to connect time and space. The 3 creatures were able to, quote-unquote, connect time and space, serving as basis for the genesis of the spatio-temporal tissue. That was never a word I've ever read before in my entire life, but that makes sense. They are the binding. They are more than just glue or tape. They are more than just muscle. They are the sinew that holds space and time together for us. It's relevant to note the word for quote-unquote lives is used here, despite the fact that they all originated from the fracturing of the original one. The new trio was not composed of avatars. They were their own independent life forms, and as the hiker makes explicit, the text is referring to the legendary Pokemon Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf. And before we continue, I just want to say thank you so much for watching. If you're enjoying this so far, first off, please make sure you do subscribe to the channel. Second off, go and make sure you subscribe to the feed that Boltoy has. Do yourself that favor. This is amazing work. I genuinely love reading what they have, and this is really the first time I've fully read something that somebody else has properly written, and it's amazing. As for here on this channel, when you do subscribe, there's weekly content that I do release. I stream weekly as well, so come say hi in the streams. It's really fun, it's really nice. I enjoy talking with you guys there, and if you really enjoyed this, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Let me know if you agree or disagree, any additional details that, we might miss. And also, comments help boost the video and its reach, which helps the channel immensely. And if you'd like to go the extra mile, become a member of the channel for as little as $3 a month, get behind the scenes info, get to see sneak peeks of stuff, and of course, you also support the channel in its entirety, as I usually am the one to write all the scripts, draw the thumbnails, do the editing, obviously the talking, so on and so forth. One-man band, and it means the world and ensures you and everyone else can continue to get free content. Anywho, once again, thank you so much for watching, and on with the video. The hiker states, one plate reads, 3 beings were born to bind time and space. Those 3 beings I read to mean the 3 Pokemon of the lakes. It's about Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf. Azelf's Pearl Pokédex entry makes the case for all 3 beings to have been born from the same egg. However, the verb, quote-unquote, to be born, is different from the one in the original story and on the Draco plate, to produce. As we'll later address, the former will be used again in reference to the Lake Trio's birth, describing events further ahead in the chronology. The contradiction is apparent. The trio was produced at the beginning of creation, but their egg will only hatch at a later time, which sounds like pretty much everything else that is happening within this original lore. Then, the intended reading of the mythos may be less intuitive. Maybe they are addressing the origin of their egg more than their emergence as individuals, or maybe the 3 closed themselves inside a shell after being generated. What we can know for sure is Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf were still able to tie space and time before breaking out of their shell. It is thought that Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf all came from the same egg. The Lake Trio laid the foundation for the world to exist as a unity of space and time. With this, it was possible for entities to fill the newborn universe. No fear of perishing in the void now that there was something for a background. Consequentially, the original story continues with Dialga and Palkia wishing for quote-unquote things to exist. In English, the 2 beings wished, and from them, matter came to be. In Japanese, we have the 2 avatars prayed, and things were born. English localization decided to render mono as matter. This isn't an improper translation per se, as the word can generally refer to all concrete objects, but it's worth pointing out that there are more fitting kanji to describe the physical concept of matter, which developers could have used if they wanted to stress out the connection. All things, all objects, were born from the legendary Pokemon, from atoms to the largest stars, making the popular suggestion of linking each creature to a certain state of matter likely unsubstantiated, at least from the point of internal consistency. Dialga and Palkia prayed in order for things to exist. That doesn't necessarily bring religious connotations, could as well be a more mundane hope. Their necessity to wish for it, however, shows the 2 avatars can't externalize new matter from their bodies directly, despite their intimate relation with the original one. It is again the deity's first incarnation that has to answer their prayer, factoring itself in the many things which now fill the material world. So Dialga and Palkia have to essentially go to Daddy Arceus and say, hey, can I have a tricycle? They don't exist, and I don't know what a tricycle is supposed to be, but can you make it a thing? And Arceus is like, here you go, my son, and slams a tricycle down on Palkia and Dialga's heads. This is also a subversion of the original idea. All different versions of the cut myths posit Aias as the one commanding La and Ea. Oh my gosh, that's not La, that's Ea. I'm so stupid and it took me this long to realize it. It's IA. To birth many things before it fell into slumber. And first developers conceptualized the chief of the pantheon as deeply involved in the creation of the universe as we know it. Now, the impulse comes from the 2 secondary avatars, asking it in return. Arceus is undeniably depicted as a benevolent god in the published titles, but it also comes off as less prone to intervention. It doesn't matter how the world exactly is, as long as its foundations aren't threatened. Details are, instead, delegated to its other aspects, and to the free will of everyone that will follow. From this point onward, myths and legends considerably shrink the timeline to the bare minimum. Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee added a chart in the Pewter Museum of Science showing a rough chronology of the universe. The diagram appears to fully borrow its elements from real-world modern understanding of physical cosmology, implying the history of the universe, in its more material sense, is likely carried over from our world, from the emergence of subatomic particles to the first molecules, up until the formation of stars and galaxies. All of this mechanically followed Dialga and Palkia's prayer. So that could effectively mean that the Big Bang in its entirety only occurred not because of Arceus, technically, but from Dialga and Palkia wanting that to occur. Coherently, general nomenclature is also adopted in the fictional setting. Pokédex entries for Cresselia confirm the Milky Way to be the name of the galaxy the series is set in, and the star the Pokemon world revolves around is referred to as the Sun in multiple occasions, while other planets of the solar system are never directly mentioned. Team Galactic commanders are named after Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto. Leaked profiles stating Cyrus chose them for their name's connection to the celestial bodies. While not diegetic, battle backgrounds in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl even show generic planets while facing members of the evil team. A man in Pewter Museum of Science also comments humanity's dreams of reaching a certain red planet. And at the same time, a horoscope exists both in Unova and Paldea, the former adopting a 12-sign zodiac referencing real constellations, although their names aren't necessarily the same of the corresponding Pokemon in Black and White. For example, in the lack of a proper Leo, Braviary was chosen to fill the role, but Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire more properly introduces a Lit Leo constellation. Even Team Star Squads are named after real stars of the Cassiopeia constellation, namely Sigen, Shidar, I have no idea how to say that word, Se, Rukba, and Kaf. It is clear both our corner of the universe and the observable celestial vault are mirrored to a large degree in the imagined scenario. With real cosmology being featured so prominently, we can imagine the events of creation took place around 13.8 billion years ago, coinciding with the current dating of the Big Bang. At the same time, it wouldn't be a stretch to suggest the planet this series takes place could be about 4.5 billion years old, just like our Earth. However, no precise temporal coordinates are ever explicitly given by the games. More divergences, after all, start to appear as we zoom onto the planet. The Crucible of Life. While developers generally try to avoid to give a name to the setting in order to keep it as separate as possible from real life, the Pokemon world is addressed in modern titles as Earth, which we see in cottony Pokédex entries as well as in reused descriptions of Hoot Hoot, Steelix, and Registeel, and in dialogues from the Let's Go games. However, the history of the planet starts to differ from ours even in its earliest stage. This Earth will soon unravel all its peculiarities, with the cottony deck stating it shoots cotton from its body to protect itself. If it gets caught up in the hurricane-strength winds, it can get sent to the other side of the Earth. We also have the secrets of space, the mysteries of Earth. There are so many things about which we know so little. And according to the canon law of Hiker, Mount Coronet is known as the origin of Sinnoh. Our first encounter with Cyrus in Diamond and Pearl moves the timeline even further back. To his understanding, the mountain was to be found in the region's beginning, in a newly created world. While the localization claims the quote-unquote human spirit is what ruined that unspoiled scenery, in the original dialogue, the boss blames the spirit in general, meaning the mountain had to exist before the metaphysical essence was spread to the world. According to one theory, Mount Coronet is where the Sinnoh region began, in a newly created world. A world where only time flowed and space expanded. There should have been no strife. But what became of that world? Because the human spirit is weak and incomplete, strife has appeared. This makes sense considering Mount Coronet is found in superimposition with the Hall of Origin, making the planet existing in the former center of the Vortex of Chaos the very core of the universe. Basically, that just says, hey, the Hall of Origin is only accessible from Mount Coronet once you play that funny little Azure float, so it makes sense that this would be the center of the world and the universe as a whole. Its importance is also mirrored by its original name, Mount Tengen, which derives from Tengen, the celestial crown worn by great kings mainly of Buddhist traditions. It is both the metaphorical crown of the world and the one worn by its demiurge. Confidential documents even label the range it belongs to as Himirogi Mountains, Himirogi being sacred spaces or altars in Shinto where gods could be summoned. The proximity to Arceus' domain obviously made the planet a fertile soil for creation. On the top of Mount Coronet, there is its peak, the Spear Pillar. While this name will only be established in universe after the events of Legends Arceus, it is also a clear reference to Shintoism creation myth. According to traditions, the deities Izanagi and Izanami were bestowed from the first gods the spear Ame no Nuboko, that they then used to make a primordial landmass arise, Onogoroshima, okay, I did say it right, upon which the pillar Ame no Mihashira was then built. Searching the seas with the Tenkei, Kobayashi Itaku, from 1880 to 90, early scripts posited Mount Coronet to be the cadaver of a primordial being knocked down by Dialga and Palkia, in a chain of events that would have also brought to life Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf. Even if the context vastly changed, it is still possible some of the implications carried over to later iterations. What the Shinto creation myth and the cut drafts have in common is a sacred mountain emerged due to a pair of gods. We also know Mount Coronet was rethought as existing since the planet's early stages. Be it metaphorical or more literal, the case can be made for Dialga and Palkia to have speared the earth to rise the heaven's crown. After all, it was only appropriate for the Hall of Origin to have a point of junction with the material world. One girl in Veilstone City even comments on the existence of a myth in which the region was parted in halves by the mountain. The myth says that Mount Coronet parted Sinnoh into halves. Seeing the Pokemon Shellos makes me think maybe the myth is real. Another element that could have been reimagined in the new setting is an involvement of the Lake Trio as concurrent with the mountain's formation. Recall their conception in the beginning of creation and the hatching of their egg are treated as different moments. Given their presence on Earth, we also need to postulate they all arrived on the planet at some point. Then the so-called quote-unquote egg may have been more of an arc for all three to safely land on the new world. Dialga and Palkia spearing its surface may have also served the secondary purpose of launching the bullet. Are you telling me the theory then is that Dialga and Palkia, whether they physically did it or metaphorically did it, shot a quote-unquote container that had Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf down to the planet, and in this explosive birth of them on the planet, it then granted humanity the gifts that these Pokemon gave. If that's real, that's arguably the sickest potential way that any Pokemon has ever been born. Zorora, eat your heart out. I don't care that lightning hit a volcano. These Pokemon just crash landed onto Earth and granted us everything that we have to do with our mind and spirit and so on and so forth. This is also paralleled partially in real mythology. Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf are based on the imperial regalia of Japan. The three sacred treasures all represent a primary virtue, drawing an evident parallel with the aspects of the spirit the Pokemon will later bring to the world. The mirror, Yata no Kagami, incarnates wisdom. The jewel, Yasakani no Magatama, is a vessel for their benevolence, and the sword, Kusanagi no Tsurugi, is the embodiment of valor. According to tradition, the artifacts were brought to Earth from the heavens above by the initiative of the legendary founder of Japanese imperial line, Ninigi no Mikoto, grandson of the goddess Amaterasu. While not exactly mirrored in the fictional story or history, the implication of the three arriving from outer space at some point is still undoubtedly present, regardless of exactly how. Both the original story and the Draco Plate recount that the three beings also made a prayer, this time wishing for the spirit to shape the world. While this is narrated after the creation of matter, it is more unclear if the heart permeated a very early universe or if it manifested after the trio arrived on Earth. However, there would be hardly any reason for the legendary Pokemon to descend on the planet in the first place if not to bestow their gift. Even if the foundation for the spirit was laid at the dawn of times, they still needed to act as vectors to concretely show its effects. In English, we read, "The three living things wished, and from them spirit came to be." In Japanese, the three lives prayed, and what is called spirit was born. The Dread Plate states in English, 2 make matter and 3 make spirit, shaping the world. In Japanese, the 2 for things and the 3 for spirit prayed, and the world was shaped. So they all prayed together, effectively. At this point, it should be clear the prayer didn't create the spirit from nothing. Once again, the original one made the Lake Trio's wish a reality, externalizing the heart from its own body. The hiker particularly cares to stress this point, and comprehensibly so. What the three wished for was for the spirit to grow abundant, displacing it from its original seat at the universe's core, and finally spreading it all over across the Earth. But the spirit itself began with Arceus' absolute existence, the original one born as its very embodiment. In English, the myth describes how they gave spirit to the world, shaping it, but it all starts with Arceus, the first. It is known as the original one. In Japanese, he states, you can read this as the story about the three of the lakes, Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf. The world expands as the spirit is abundant. The story starts with Arceus' absolute existence. By this point, Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf were likely still inside their common vessel, as the moment described in the script as their proper birth dates to a period nearer to humanity's dawn. But even if the three aspects of the spirits weren't yet brought independently, the whole essence permeated the planet, causing the world to expand. With inorganic matter having developed thanks to Dialga and Palkia's prayer, atoms imbued with spirit could only result in a single outcome, the advent of life as we know it. Cut content reinforces this idea. Earlier drafts of the creation myth describe more thoroughly the advent of the Lake Trio on the planet, revealing they were supposed to be entrusted by Ia and Ea with a seed of life. Upon their prayer, this seed would have turned into a full-developed tree of life. Sorry, that excites me because of Lucario and the Mystery of Mew movie with the Tree of Life in it. Sorry. Which embodied the attributes of life's growth. It is clear this sacred plant would have been at the origin of all earthling life forms, be it microorganisms at first, or plants and animals at a later time. Not only this image doesn't conflate with established canon, but was also reutilized in secondary media. A proper Tree of Life, albeit written in a simpler kanji, is featured in Super Mystery Dungeon as the source of all life of the world. Even before, the 8th movie, I'm happy he talks about this, played with the idea of a super ancient Tree of the World's beginning, as a gigantic crystal colony living in symbiosis with Earth's earliest species. More specifically, I'm going to go ahead and state that that tree is tied to Mew. If Mew dies, the tree dies. If the tree dies, Mew dies, and it's a huge cataclysm and issue. On the matter of which, Mew are described in the Pokédex as the ancestors of every Pokémon. Clearly, this is an exaggeration. Even in the most generous interpretation, we have to exclude deities and other special cases. However, the new species Pokémon can perfectly serve as the common ancestor for all animal life forms on the planet. The movie screenwriters even directly acknowledged a relation between the mythical Pokemon and their take on the Tree of Life, so it seems to be the case for the latter to have imbued matter with spirit, even in shapes so different from the source. The existence of this Yggdrasil also helps to contextualize the development of non-Pokemon species such as bacteria and common plants, which would difficultly descend from Mew without undergoing drastic biological reprogramming. If the tree is the true source of life, then all its kingdoms have a solid foundation in its divine energy poured in the veins of the young planet. Because it is able to use every move, there are many scientists who believe that Mew is the ancestor of all Pokemon, something that is directly stated within the games. The only question would be why the Tree of Life is never featured or even mentioned in any of the mainline titles. The same cut myths, however, also reveal the plant is no longer alive. With time, the tree continued to grow more and more like the life it embodied, until it covered the whole world with its roots and branches. For this reason, it was ultimately cut, ironically, also from the actual script. The culprit behind this act varies between different iterations. In some, it was a reluctant act by the Lake Trio, but this is impossible in the final draft, as they would only emerge from their egg later down the line. In others, it was the work of Hoenn's super ancient Pokemon. The origin of Groudon, Kyogre, and Rayquaza is never addressed in the games, but we know the last one existed for hundreds of millions of years in the ozone layer. They surely are primordial creatures, as even their titles highlight. Excluding widely inconsistent takes, most of cut myths ascribe their birth to Ea and Ea, shaping 3 beasts in order to counter the Tree of Life under the Lake Trio's request. Upon the tree's fall, its components would have split into 3 pieces that would have become the earth, the ocean, and the sky. Each member of the trio would have then ruled over, which then... Okay, so the tree breaking apart, what does the tree do? It needs air, it needs water, it needs soil. That's why we get these 3 creatures that are the embodiments of these three things and are able to spread it throughout the world. Rayquaza states it has lived for hundreds of millions of years in the ozone layer. Its flying form looks like a meteor. We'll go back to the continuation of this myth in a separate thesis, but it should be noted this last section, and especially those following, read as highly folkloristic, even factoring the early period of development. Simply put, the source of all life ultimately sprouting the ecosystem's inorganic components lacks of internal consistency. More than likely, the idea was that cutting the tree freed those components from its overgrowing branches, making them habitable and distinguishable. The Hoenn legendary Pokemon originating from Dialga and Palkia directly may also be too much of a jump to make in established canon, considering the dragons were also father and mother of the Lake Trio in the same drafts, while lacking any apparent creative power in the published games. But even if the three beasts simply arose from the spirit permeating the planet, they still remain the most plausible candidates for the Tree of Life's ultimate demise. At the end of the day, you may say it simply killed itself. What we can know for sure is that life managed to outlive its progenitor. From Mew, multiple species arose in an intricate net of phylogenetic relationships that grew bigger and bigger as millennia went by. The planet's surface started to look more familiar, with land masses and oceans slowly forming. At the same time, what will later become the Sinnoh region witnessed the formation of some important structures in this area, long predating continental drift. An interesting thing to note is that members of the Lake Trio can't learn ancient power. This primeval power strikes the opponent with prehistoric power, and the in-battle animation often showing rocks and fossils rising from the lower strati to hit the target. Pokemon able to learn this move usually developed in ancient times, although it is not always a reliable indicator. Creatures which surely emerged only after the eggs hatching, Boltoy and Bronzor among the obvious examples, can still learn it naturally, showing how its usage is more related to some connection with the planet's stratigraphy rather than to the species' actual ancientness. So, whoa, hold on. The branch of geology concerned with the order and relative position of strata and their relationship to the geological timescale. So effectively, basically it's the fact that it's more related to the fact that there were archaeological remains of these Pokemon that were able to learn ancient power, which would also explain why Bronzor and Bronzong are able to learn it, because they were buried for a long period of time, alongside many of the fossil Pokemon. Mammothswine, knowing that there were mammoths buried, or rather their remains were uncovered from their buried status, and that's why they're all able to learn this, and that's why Boltoy stated it the way that they did. Okay. If so, the Lake Trio likely didn't develop the ability to channel this energy because they grew isolated from the rest of the world, slumbering in their lakes and never witnessing the ages going by. This is coherent with their egg hatching sometime after its arrival on Earth, with the three lakes having formed after specific geological processes in the primordial era, while the Guardians only made them their homes after their proper birth. More specifically, both Mesprit's Lake Verity, Lake Sentiment, and Azov's Lake Valor, directly called Lake Resolve, are of volcanic origins, as their real-life counterparts, water-filling craters left from huge eruptions in the past. Volo alludes to the possibility the latter's depression may have also been carved out by a clash between Pokemon, and while an ancient Heatran may be involved, Groudon and Kyogre better fit the idea of a fight between more creatures. Indeed, while Verity and Valor may have been shaped by the avatars of Land's eruption, Uxie's Lake Acuity, Lake Wisdom, contains traces of seawater, like its inspiration, probably a pit filled by the ocean beast's powerful water-type moves. Kyogre, then. They say this lake actually used to be a volcano. Then it erupted, leaving a huge crater that filled with water, and so Lake Verity was born. Do you know about Lake Valor? It's said to have been formed by a volcanic eruption, much like Lake Verity, though there are other theories that say it was carved out in the midst of a Pokemon battle. Here we are, Lake Acuity. You know, I've been told it actually contains seawater as well. Nobody knows why though. Could be a fluke or geography, or perhaps it's connected to a Pokemon somehow. Uxie, Mesprit, and Azov chose the ancient lakes as their homes. This wasn't just out of desire or isolation. The willpower Pokemon entry in Diamond confirms they continuously sleep at their bottoms in order to keep the world in balance. In short, they serve as pillars of the world. Their long-lasting slumber, what effectively links time and space together in according to the power that old myths assigned them. It's even possible to suggest the reason the three stayed in their egg for so long was to play this exact purpose. The trio effectively sleeps at the bottom of their lakes, the caves we can access to catch them being either closed to people considered unworthy in Legends Arceus, or completely absent in Generation 4. In fact, the central islands only appear on the map after the bomb in Lake Valor explodes, showing how the three legendary Pokemon are strictly connected to one another, responding when one is disturbed. Such link is also why the water pattern in each cave is the stylization of the Sinnoh region, with the other lakes being highlighted in their respective positions. As a quick side, because I didn't say it earlier, the entire idea of Kyogre being a reason why one of those lakes even came into existence for Uxie is amazingly sick. And there was some speculation in a previous video from you guys in the comments stating that some Pokemon, more specifically our Super Ancient Trio, and their clashes may have created more homes for other Pokemon, such as the Lake Guardians. Actually, let me go find that comment. Okay, more specifically, at Diego, I assume is what it's supposed to be, states that within the original Dragon video I released, and how there's the Abyssal Ruins and then Relic Castle, that there is the possibility, or wouldn't it be very interesting to find out that the kingdom being buried and the other one being flooded would be potentially related to Kyogre and Groudon, but there is not really strong evidence for this, as they state themselves, but it is something that could be expanded on in the future and would be very interesting to find out. Continuing with what we have in evidence from Boltoy, the Pokemon of the Three Lakes are connected somehow, thanks to Saturn's grand standing at Lake Valor. A cavern appeared here. It was the cavern where the Pokemon Mesprit slept. Mesprit appeared too, probably to go help its friends. Though this isn't to say that the Lake Guardians aren't free to move. According to Mesprit's Pearl entry, the Pokemon is able to project away from its body, hovering over the waters in soul alone. Despite localization calling it spirit, this is a different concept that the capitalized homonym, the original term used, is Tamashi, more often referring to the actual souls of which ghosts are manifestations, maybe a reference to their original typing in early drafts. Although it slumbers at the bottom of the lake, its spirit is said to leave its body and flitter on the water's surface, for the direct quote. So while the Lake Trio their true bodies linger in the abyssal depths, at any time, their essences can leave them to interact with the outside world. If the ones we can encounter in the games are just their souls or their real flesh is more debatable. But since they aren't ghost type in the final products, me not knowing that they were originally being stated to be ghost types and are now psychic types, and Lake Valor was effectively blown up without any trace of Azov's sleeping corpse, it seems more likely that the three just temporarily leave their positions during particular crises. In any case, in order for the legendary Pokemon to occupy their respective lakes, their egg must have hatched at some point after the formation. The emergence of Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf had two main consequences. One was the birth of humanity as we know it. The other was continental drift. Among all the stories in Kanalav Library, Sinnoh's myth is without a doubt the most obscure one. Three Pokemon are described divining deeper and deeper into the lakes. I assume that's supposed to say diving, until they rose to the surface, bringing the power to make vast lands with them. Three Pokemon there were. Into the lakes they dove. Deep, deep, drawing no breath. Deeper, deeper they dove. Into suffocating depths they dove. Deeper than deepest they alight. From the lake floor they rise, bearing with them the power to make vast lands. They rise again, straight from the myth. Of course, this refers to the three keepers of the spirit and their sacred waters. But what exactly is this power they were able to retrieve in their descendants? Is this a metaphorical tale on how the Lake Trio cast the spirit among humans, allowing the spread of civilization? If so, it surely reads as vague. Fortunately, the original text gives just enough context to exclude this interpretation. Three Pokemon there were. They held their breath, remaining in that state. They dove deeper and deeper into the lakes. They dove deeper and deeper despite the pain. And from the bottom of the lakes, they fetched an important thing. That is said to serving as the power for making the lands. Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf dove deep into their respective lakes, in a process that was physically or mentally harmful based on this, meaning it's not something they are used to physiologically doing, and then fetched an important thing. The word here used for thing is text I'm going to put on screen. Even if it can be occasionally used as an empathetic particle to underline a concept or an emotion, this usually addresses something physical and concrete. It also doesn't say anything else on the nature of said thing. It can be an object, but also a living entity or a person. For reference, this is the same word used to describe Dialga and Palkia's matter, but also rendered as being for the original one. So while reading the English localization, you could have the impression the text is referring to some sort of abstract power. The reality is different enough. Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf dove deep down their lakes to retrieve a concrete object or a living entity from their floors. The verb that is used here is translated as serving, is a continuous tense, describing a state of the subject that started in the past and is continuing in the present. It can be translated in many ways, and a more common interpretation would be the use of have been or have become. However, the thing that was retrieved is likely something concrete, so it cannot be the power itself. Rather, it is in a continuous state of possessing that power, reduced here to a simpler serving as due to the presence of a conjunction, putting it on screen, used to point to something's purpose. In short, the text is saying the purpose of this thing and the power it possesses are to make lands, with the verb tense telling us this remains true at the time the myth was written. Make can refer both to an act of creation or to making things with pre-existing materials. For example, it could be used referencing the construction of a building or the cooking of a meal. You know, common things. Then the mysterious object has either the power to generate lands from nothing or to rearrange them to create something new. And one creature fits perfectly that profile. There is an enduring legend that states this Pokemon towed continents with ropes. The origin of Regigigas has always been a mystery, as one of the great absents from Kanaloft City's literature, seemingly so, at least. But looking more closely to the original script, it's abundantly clear Sinnoh's myth tells us the story of how the colossal Pokemon is responsible for continental drift was extracted in ancient times by the bottom of their lakes by Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf. If this means the golem was crafted by the three with materials fetched from the submerged soil or just found sleeping somewhere in the deep is unknown at the time of generation 4. I almost said 5. 4. Also, I'm a little frazzled from the idea of Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf tugging Regigigas, the sleeping giant from deep under the earth. This being that I wish I had a plush of behind me, but arguably one of my favorite legendaries, bar like very few. I mean, those two are the other amazing ones that stick to my brain, Ogerpon and Zygarde. But Regigigas being lifted, this continental-sized Pokemon, by 3 1.5 foot tall Pokemon together is insane. Legends Arceus, however, helped to shed some light on the matter. After catching Regigigas, Adaman will note how the Pokemon seems like a giant born from the very earth. While not so explicit in the original dialogue, he still addresses the golem as a giant of the land, using the same term for the vast lands in Sinnoh's myth. I will add to this that there is a difference here in saying that the giant was just like on the land in general. These do seem to imply that it was from the earth, from within the planet itself, not that it's like a human that is on the planet. Of course, the leader of the Diamond Clan can't possibly know what Regigigas' true origins really are, but developers delivering exposition speaking to the players through a character is no news for the franchise. Just think of the Kanaloft hiker educating us on events predating the very birth of the universe, with Adaman's direct words stating, "Now that was one solid Pokemon, like a giant born from the very earth." If Regigigas is indeed a creature born out of the planet's land, the implication may be the Lake Trio, in their act of painful submerging, impregnated the earth with their spirit, quote-unquote impregnated, resulting in the Colossus's birth. During the Sinjo event in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, Cynthia even hints at the planet being a gargantuan egg of some sort. That is amazing. Indeed, the image of Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf traversing the waters deeper and deeper, slowly approaching the Earth's core, is already quite reminiscent of sperm cells fecundating? Fecundating? I have not used that word before. An egg. Which, yeah, I mean, I could kind of imagine the three of them swimming and it looking like the flagella. That makes sense. The direct text states, an egg is the cradle of every being. The planet itself is an egg in a sense. Life that comes from an egg will come to an end in due course. To begin anew, that may be what Arceus wanted to show us. As for their reason for indulging in such an act, the games are quiet. However, the Lake Trio coming out of their egg also resulted in humans becoming self-aware. The Pokemon using Regigigas as a test run to their later spreading of emotion, knowledge, and will would parallel Hebrew mythology, as some doctrines imagined golems as constructs God created from mud before infusing life on the first man. In addition, leaked scripts imply more pragmatic motives following the disruption of the original supercontinent. Alternatively, it may have been a simple act of sub-creation carried by their own desire to spread new life even in absence of the primeval tree. If anything, it was an impulse undoubtedly inherited by their spawn. Devil's Gigantomachy. Of the many aces, Hall Matron Argenta has up her sleeves, 3 among others may strike as an oddity. Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf can be included in her team. In the same games, we can catch them ourselves. In a context where the multiverse wasn't yet legitimized as an established narrative tool, which we would find in Sun and Moon for example, the only thing we can conclude is the existence of multiple specimens of the Lake Trio. While the 3 seems to be described as a unique trio in their mythology, this reveals to be partial information from the human writers. After all, having multiple individuals guarantees a safety net to keep space and time in check in case one triplet goes missing or the 2 avatars go rampant far from one's reach. From Arceus' perspective, this was only a sensible decision. This would also line up with pretty much every other legendary or mythical having multiples of themselves. If this is true, then the Earth may not have been the only planet struck by a seed of life. Indeed, alien life forms are present in the franchise since Generation 1, from Clefairy to Deoxys and Elgyem, meaning the spirit permeated even the most remote corners of the universe. Each of these instances requires the Lake Trio's direct intervention in the development of a tree of life, regardless if the particular shape of the progenitor would be the same or differ based on a specific environmental condition or conditions. Life forms on other planets may even be more ancient, or they may have developed faster compared to the main setting. This is especially plausible considering Earth's centrality in the large cosmological picture. With God's home at close reach, it makes sense they would only attempt its colonization after preemptive testing. And so, seeds were sowed across the vast universe in a time before Mew grew abundant on what we would know as Earth. Not always with the best results, the inscription on the flame plate is one of the most cryptic as well, and at the same time important, bits of lore in the franchise. The defeated giants are only mentioned in this instance, nonetheless bearing the implication the powers inside Arceus' plates were originally theirs, the giants. The essences inside the legendary artifacts are the types every Pokemon possesses, the engraving revealing to us an almost unspoken truth. Those energies were not originally under Arceus' jurisdiction. The English version stating the power of defeated giants infuses this plate, and in Japanese, the powers bestowed to the plates are the powers of defeated giants. What I'm able to add to this is that within Shinto belief, you have the idea of someone becoming a god, someone ascending to godhood, whether it be through blood relation or whether it be through accomplishing great tasks, through great achievements, whatever it is that you name it. And if there is any chance other kami existed, other quote-unquote gods existed before the original one, then what that could mean is that they were gods or kamis that were defeated through that Shinto belief, and then their powers became these plates, which also explains why Volo is able to try and do the same thing with Giratina's help. something that I explored in a previous video as well, the biblical apocalypse of Pokemon. Onward with Boltoy's information. Types, other than normal, being the unused state of the plates at their creation, were the powers of giants, of which they were stripped of at their defeat. The games are never explicit on the identity of these fallen titans, and this is because their role was largely marginalized from earlier drafts. In reality, this aspect of the creation myth was originally going to be explored much more in depth, although developers never had a clear idea in mind on how to frame it in the broader context. Excluding minor variations, there are 5 main versions that were proposed, all with different takes on what these creatures should have been. In Pokemon Myth 1 and 5, we see a version of the original story similar to the one in the finalized games, with the addition of the Tree of Life, and its later demise by a Hoenn legendary Pokemon in the former, by the Lake Trio in the latter, which is what we've exactly talked about. In these, the giants would have been primordial creatures born from the fragments of Arceus' egg, seeped into the vortex of chaos. The original one would have defeated them in a fierce battle at the dawn of the world, even before Aya and Aya were conceived. Developers note how the giants weren't thought as Pokemon, and they were intended to represent the fear of a newborn separated from their mother's womb in parallel to Jungian psychology. In this case, the terror of a young deity to exist outside its shell, which is exactly what Arceus does. A slightly alternative take is present in Pokemon Myth 5.3, is what I assume, where the egg would have created a single black giant with similar destructive intent. When Arceus was able to defeat this fiend, it tore apart its body to craft the many gods of creation, in a reimagination of mythological tales like that of the Chinese Pangu or the Norse Ymir. Different parts of its body would have served as the basis for shaping the world, which effectively sounds like, oh, hey, here's this big god, let's play Operation now that I've killed you. Oops, you become Dialga. Oops, you become Victini. Oops, I don't know what you're gonna become, let's just turn you into Yveltal and Xerneas, I guess. Why not? The giant's right hand was turned into Aya, the left into Aya. Okay, again, I need to just... I make these jokes and I just diverge from what Boltoy has written, and then it ends up being the exact same thing that he's going to talk about in a second. So, cool. Uxie was crafted from its eyes, Mesprit from its heart, Azelf from its throat. Finally, its nose became Groudon, Kyogre, and Rayquaza. Why? Okay, hold on. Right and left, we already understand the mother and the father. And then, like, that's how creation was born. You make matter. Mesprit from its heart, emotion. Azelf from its throat, which is determination, which is very interesting. Or, like, willpower. Don't know why throat would be that. Unless it's, like, shouting and screaming. I'm not really sure. I don't understand that. Maybe it's a cultural thing. And then Uxie, crafted from the eyes. See it to believe it. I'm not really sure. That's wisdom. So I don't exactly know where that falls in as well. But then when we get the noses, Groudon, Kyogre, and Rayquaza, earth, water, air, I mean, I guess you're breathing in all 3 of those things. There's particles in the air, there's moisture in the air, and then there's the actual air itself. So I suppose there is that. A single giant is also featured in the second myth. Here, the first deity would have produced the Black Giant, along with the gods of light and time, as a destroyer of all things. Don't we have a giant, a dark giant in one of the Pokemon mystery dungeons? I'm 99% sure that we do. Editing Krillic, throw that in. I'm too lazy to look it up right now. Necessary in order to break its own egg from the inside. But this system eventually backfired. The shell did shatter, and the world could be shaped under the guidance of Aya and Aya. But all life that emerged from within was promptly killed by the Black Giant in its instinctual rage. Sounding like Giratina here. Unable to move against their sibling, the gods entrusted a wise human with the mission to take down the fiend, sounding like the hero of myth. In order to do so, the Lake Trio was conceptualized as a weapon for the man to wield against the monster. Uxie froze the Titan, nullifying its motion. Mesprit allowed to resonate with the enemy's mind and understand its thoughts. Azelf gave the human the will to not tremble in its presence. The Black Giant was finally defeated, and upon Aya and Aya sharing part of their essences to its corpse, its body became the foundation of the sky, the land, and the sea. Its soul was converted in the respective rulers of 3 realms that will then be recorded in Hoenn's folklore and history. A somewhat similar scenario would have played out in Myth 3, which we've briefly mentioned before in relation to the origin of Mount Coronet. In this alternative take, Arceus would have released a single giant, an avatar embodying its rage, so that it could shatter the walls of the world and allow its expansion. However, this creature was innately destructive, having the power to consume and purify everything. As they were one part of the other, none was able to kill its other half, sounding like the 2 dragons from the original dragon. But the giants eventually even managed to dethrone Arceus from its divine seat and casted it away. It was only a matter of time before its descendants upon the material plane. The narration then would have moved to the world of humans. One day, a man found a wounded woman lying on the ground. He carried her at his home and took care of her, and they soon fell in love. After she was healed, the woman became pregnant and gave birth to 2 children. It was at that time that she revealed her true form as Arceus. The deity spoke to the man of the giant that was slowly approaching, seeking the planet's destruction, and that the only way to stop it was through the twins carrying the blood of a god, Ea and Aya. Those were the names the father felt most appropriate. Upon revealing the truth, the woman vanished beyond sight. Years passed. Aya and Aya grew healthily with their father's love. Then, the giants arrived. Growling beyond a world of nothingness, it stole everything at its passage. Colors, sounds, calmness, humans, Pokemon, all disappeared. Noticing the brothers, the giant charged them with rage, and the father impulsively jumped between them, perishing from the blow. Saddened, Aya and Aya tore apart their human husks and turned into gargantuan dragons. After a fierce battle, they were able to prevail. The giants fell to the ground, devoid of life. With their victory, Arceus was able to manifest once again. The father's soul was deemed worthy, its aspects repurposed in the essence of the 3 Pokemon of the lakes. Their gift to the world would have refilled it with all that was lost by the rogue avatar. As for the giant, its corpse remained speared to the ground. The original deity prayed, and the Colossus transformed into a giant mountain. Aya and Aya were ordered to ascend to its peak, bestowing light and time to a universe now in peace. At last, Arceus returned to its divine seat. Finally, Masuda's mythological document tells a completely different story. One of the first drafts to be conceptualized, this version features a large and unseen pantheon which was almost entirely reimagined at a later time. Still, the figure of a giant was present since back then, although this Reek would have effectively taken the role of the first gods to emerge from the vortex of chaos. In millennia, the giant grew larger and larger until 2 other deities manifested. One of them was Shin, which took the form of a human. The other, Gao, appeared in the shape of a Pokemon. The 2 grew acquainted with one another and formed a bond of friendship, and together decided to lock Reek away. The giant was confined and eventually turned into a corpse, which Shin and Gao dismembered to create the world. Its breath became wind and clouds, its voice thunders, and its blood all waters in the seas, the rivers, and the lakes. Its flesh became the land, its bones the mountains, and rocks its broken teeth. Then other gods were crafted with what remained. Reek's 3 eyes became the god of light, Aya, the god of time, Ea, and the unnamed god of darkness. Then the light of Aya casted a god of shadows. The last document is so much of a stub that it even posits a second birth of Ea as the god of sound. Indeed, its signature move was originally the shockwave, sound echo, while Aya's domain over light would have allowed it to launch a flashbang. It also alluded to a god of space, seemingly comparable to modern Dialga. It is clear these are all early drafts that were vastly reimagined in the final products. We can even see the transition to Shin and Gao to Father Aya and Mother Ea as progenitors of Pokemon and mankind, a concept that will also be thrown away in favor of a more gradual separation between the 2 worlds. What it did remain from these ideas is the core aspect of the defeated giants. They are creatures that opposed Arceus at some point in time, often due to their relation with a state of chaos, and were ultimately slain. Even the chronology is hard to pin down based on linked materials alone. In some stories, the giants are defeated at the beginning of creation, in others when humans existed already, and while they were undoubtedly thought as primordial, even the moment of their birth should be questioned in modern canon, given the blank plate gives as a possible delay from the item's formation of the universe's first days and them gaining the power of types. If we can't trust discarded ideas, then all that's left is work with given data. For instance, it is interesting to note the root for giant is the same as Regigigas' category, namely gigantic Pokemon, with the Colossus also being addressed with the same word by Adaman, as we've discussed. This isn't to say the legendary Pokemon is one of those creatures, but it makes you wonder if the nomenclature couldn't be used also for those born in similar conditions, especially since there are better candidates for the epithet if we stopped at its size. We've established the golem formed from the Earth's core, fecundated by the Lake Trio, but what of all other planets struck by a seed of life? Wouldn't the three guardians also experiment with life in the cosmos' periphery? That would only be appropriate, especially if the reason to venture in the great beyond was to assure the chosen Earth would produce safe results. Maybe then, other gigantic Pokemon once emerged from isolated corners of creation, far from divine influence. But whether this is truly the origin of the original one's worst enemies, it still begs the question of what was the cause of their ire. What was that which corrupted them? The distortion world is described as the world on the opposite side of ours. In this dimension, everything is upside down. Time doesn't flow, space isn't stable, the very rules behind causality are questioned. The toxic plate describes this confusing domain where the truths of space-time just don't apply. In English, the rules of time and space change within the opposite world. In Japanese, the opposite side of the world differs in the truths of time and space. According to Cyrus, it and our plane are like two strands of DNA. Both can't exist without each other, one even able to repair the breaks in its double. The same concept is summarized in the text on the fist plate. This reality seems, in other words, to serve as a proper backbone for the material world, both something to sustain upon and a safety measure in case of damage, which is expressed within the Giratina and the Sky Warrior movie in some capacity. But as the relation is mutual, the opposite is also true from the perspective of the distortion world. Genes can be considered the blueprints of all life forms. That includes humans and Pokemon alike. Genes are contained in a DNA strand. A DNA strand consists of two chains of opposing characteristics in a spiral. If one of the chains were to be broken, the other could replicate it. One or the other cannot exist without its opposite. Do you understand where I'm going with this? This is a bizarre world. I don't know why I gave Cyrus the more nerdy voice at the beginning. I apologize. Time doesn't flow. Space isn't stable. Only that shadowy Pokemon lives here. This world is the opposite of our world. Our world, I wish to change. It is like the two chains composing the strand of DNA. The two worlds must be balancing each other to remain in existence. Without one, the other cannot exist. In English, for the fist plate, we get the rift is born of disorder on the other side of this world. In Japanese, when the opposite side of the world gets disturbed, a rift in space-time is produced. Again, we get to see that in some capacity or a version of it in the Sky Warrior movie. The nature of this reality and the creative process behind its design have been discussed in different occasions. A 2009 G4 interview with Junichi Masuda and director Takeshi Kawachimaru revealed modern physics to have played an important role in the distortion world's conceptualization. Kawachimaru, I apologize, refers to antimatter as the core idea behind the concept. Indeed, this is something Heart and Soul Silver also mentioned directly during the Sinjo event, with Cynthia calling the place a world of antimatter. However, more than a scientifically accurate representation of reverse charged particles, this brings to the table a cultural subtext that is easy to miss. As a matter of fact, we don't instantly annihilate upon entering the realm. I believe that is derived from the idea that if matter touches antimatter, it just explodes. And the whole idea behind why the Big Bang even happened in the first place is matter and antimatter came into existence at the same time, lots of it, they collided, and then we had the Big Bang. Now, onto the interview with G4. Pokemon Platinum's concept is based on some heady things like Einstein's theory of relativity, matter, and antimatter. Would you kindly expand on that for the G4 audience? Kawachimaru then states, I was the one that set the direction for Platinum. Mr. Masuda came to me and explained the original concept for the Pokemon Giratina. He mentioned antimatter as something. It's there, but it's something you can't see. Mr. Masuda gave me a lot of key concepts to design around. Matter, antimatter, Einstein's theory of relativity. I was the one that had to make those concepts a realization in a Pokemon game, both visually and implementing certain tricks into the gameplay to give the player a sense of bipolarity. There's a concept in Particle in physics called CP violation. It helps explain the relationship between matter and antimatter. The relationship is bipolar. The reality is that antimatter is something that's very, very fragile. This concept weighs heavily in how we came up with Pokemon Platinum's distortion world. Kawachimaru mentions the CP violation to describe the relation between the matter in the common reality and the matter, or rather antimatter, in the distortion world. Without even attempting to delve into the dense and incomprehensible jungle of theoretical physics, Wikipedia defines this as the principles according to which the laws of physics should be the same if a particle is interchanged with its antiparticle, C symmetry, while its spatial coordinates are inverted, mirror, or P symmetry. The latter symmetry is particularly relevant, as noted in another interview with Masuda and Kawachimaru, published April 2009 issue of Nintendo Power Magazine. Here the ideas behind the distortion world are further expanded, with Kawachimaru stating, I normally receive key terms from Masuda in the first stage of development, but there were many random terms like antimatter and E equals mc squared, reverse Mount Fuji, which is known as Sakasa Fuji, and so on. He explained that Sakasa Fuji is the reflection of Mount Fuji on the lake, and it's the antimatter world. Something I will note is something we see at the very beginning of Diamond and Pearl. It was challenging to put that concept into the game, so we did extensive research. I didn't know exactly what antimatter was either. I personally think I comprehend it well, but I wonder. Masuda follows with, yes, it exists, but it actually doesn't. It doesn't exist, but it does. That sort of thing. The mountain exists on the lake through human eyes, but it's only a reflection and doesn't actually exist. It's a diverse world. You see it only because you are looking at it with your eyes. I'm impressed with Kawachimaru for being able to take ingredients that were not substantial and incorporate them into Platinum. To explain that better, because the first time, this was one of the only sections that I actually did pre-read when I was looking at Boltoy's works, and to better express or understand that, it's effectively saying that the reflection of the mountain, you know that there's something there, but it's not actually physically there. It's like a ghost of itself. With the reflection not being physical, but still being there, you then get into all these other different concepts and these twists and ideas that then influenced what happens within the creation of the Diamond Pearl Platinum games. That something has to exist. Something such as a mirror world, which is exactly what the world of Giratina is actually called within the Sky Warrior movie. Once more. Now, continuing with the document, the antimatter Masuda referred to in the first stage of development is actually an attempt to ground to modern science the concept of inverted Fuji. The reflection of the mountain on Lake Tanuki gives the impression an upside-down relief exists in the mirror of waters. This is the true basis for Distortion World, a reality where everything is upside down, where matter is the opposite of matter, time and space don't work, and everything is in contraposition with its normal self. Platinum Japanese official website makes this even clearer, affirming in the Distortion World neither time nor space exist in the first place. What the dimension is made of is a different concept, functioning in the opposite way of space-time as a whole. But if matter arose from the first two's prayer, the obvious conclusion would be for antimatter to be a consequence of this third, new aspect of reality. More than directly equating it to the concept itself, the Distortion World is needed for the universe's very foundation, the material world falling apart without it. We can then be sure it was around when the time world and space world were cast into existence. This is something the mystery files also suggest in saying both three aspects have to intertwine in order for a world to be born anew.
There is a legend that when Arceus got up there, the mystery stage, time, space, and antimatter intersected and a world was born. Since the legendary Pokemon Giratina is the only sentient creature living here, the easiest assumption would be the distortion world was born as a consequence of its existence, much like Dialga and Palkia with their respective dimensions. With the information given in Generation 4, this was indeed the only logical conclusion, to which both Cyrus and Cynthia agree after studying the ancient texts. When this world was made, Dialga and Palkia appeared. Apparently there was one more Pokemon that appeared at the time, a Pokemon with as much power as Dialga and Palkia, but also one whose name was never to be spoken, Giratina. It's said to lurk in another world, a world on the opposite side of ours. The shadowy Pokemon must have made this bizarre world. That's why trying to change our world disturbed it and made it reveal itself. This made sense then. Giratina was an outcast, forbidden by the old folklore due to its violence, and that is why it wasn't present in the stories of creation, even if it was as ancient as the other deities. The problem is, Legend Arceus reveals this idea to be unfounded. Out of the 19 plates we can find in the game, 5 of them allude to the distortion world, 3 explicitly mentioning its ruler. Only 3 bear stories of Palkia and Dialga. The implication couldn't be more evident. Giratina's damnatio memoriae happened after the plates were engraved, and despite this, the icicle plate still affirms only 2 avatars were set free to create the world. What other reason could have been to exclude the renegade Pokemon other than its birth being successive to that moment? The inscription on the spooky plate is revelatory in this regard. In English, it states, "The other side of this world was given by the original one to its raging third." In Japanese, we have, "The opposite side of the world is bestowed to the being itself, raging avatar." The distortion world was bestowed to Giratina, meaning it was not originally its domain. The verb used has the specific connotation of give to someone of lower status, often as a reward. Then, even if it isn't explicit in the original version, the localization's claim that the gift was from the original one seems to be the clear intention. Giratina is also addressed as a Bunshin like Dialga and Palkia. It is in every way a part of the original one's body, in which the creator's consciousness reversed, a projection of its spirit in a different vessel. But while the first 2 deities were avatars of space and time, Giratina wasn't conceived as the sovereign of antimatter, a role it will only later assume. It is instead the raging avatar, clearly reusing the original idea of the Giants of Anger from Pokemon Myth 3. There is one Hisuian verse that tells of a powerful light creating a deep shadow. I imagine that this deep shadow is Giratina. Laventon is right in picturing Giratina as a shadow cast by God's light, but why was it created in the first place? It should be obvious at this point that the common Western interpretation of the Pokemon as a Satan or rogue angel is imprecise. Giratina and Arceus are the same entity, the former the incarnation of the latter's rage. In other words, at some point the original one felt the need to give its inner violence a form, and that avatar was later awarded with its own dimension. Earlier drafts attributed this rage to the original one's inability to hatch from its own egg, but this never resurfaced in the final script, and that being the case, there would be no point in a later bequeathing of the distortion world. So, we need a pretext, and to who the all-encompassing deity's anger could have been directed other than the giants who moved war against it. So long story short, when Arceus was born, it's being attacked by these other giants. It needs this rage, it needs this power, and attacks the giants, and it gives that anger eventually a physical form, becoming Giratina. And Boltoy continues stating, "I believe this Pokemon must hail from a world where the heavens and the earth are as one. There is, though, no way of proving it. The student professor imagines the distortion world as a place where there's no distinction between heavens and earth. This is a fitting description, considering how much space distorts itself there, but it also underlines an important truth. In Giratina's domain, everything tends to blend as one. The sky and the land are the same, but also space and time are replaced by a single third concept. This inclination is rather peculiar,
considering the original state of the universe was precisely a great singularity. I will say that this also adds in, or makes sense, with what happens to Archie and Maxie in the Pokemon Adventures manga, where they are effectively dead and are reborn in their Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire versions for a short time, and when their energy is spent helping save the world, they pass away once more, with their souls having been reformed within the distortion world. Pokemon Generations further explores this analogy, with Cyrus affirming the distortion world is a reality much unlike the one he sought, a perfect state that requires no spirit. The vortex of chaos was broken in its unity by the spirit of humanity's will, and the world on the opposite side of ours serves as a counterbalance to that wish. It's a dimension which spontaneously seeks to nullify that first act of creation, a chaos world, like both the regular anime and the Pokemon Adventures manga fittingly refers to, using the same word for the primordial essence of the turmoil. The two realities may have continued to exist independently, at least in theory, but history shows this is not what happened. The spirit eventually managed to cross the boundaries of dimensions, sprouting lives in the distortion world, as attested by the plants growing there even to these days. Maybe one seed of life inadvertently fell down there one day, or maybe it simply seeped from our plane without anyone noticing. At that point, Chaos's counterattack must have been to find its way to the other side, and when planets far from Arceus' influence were infused with heart, corrupted giants arose from their cores. Recall, these beasts were originally conceived as fragments of the egg which bathed in the vortex, and you may say their true nature never really changed aside from chronology. If this is true, it is perfectly explained why types originally belonged to the fallen titans. As creatures tainted by chaos, they were able to manifest new aspects of diversity that were yet to be divided from the original turmoil. And so, an army of gargantuan warriors possessing mysterious and unseen powers were born, determined to bring the spirit's supremacy to an end. The world had to return to that beautiful, chaotic singularity, the world without conflict ultimately sought by Cyrus. After all, you can't have conflict if you are all the same being, the same aspect, the same ideas, the same thought processes, the same heart, mind, and soul, the singularity. If decided that this was a path to take, then so be it. However, if the giants ever managed to strike any significant damage, their campaign was destined to miserably fail. The original one externalized all its rage towards the chaotic spawns, bringing Giratina into existence. Even if Dialga and Palkia played a part in the conflict, the renegade Pokemon was violence incarnate, the perfect champion to send on the battlefield if you wanted to extinguish your enemies for good. The first half of the battle may have taken place in the material world, especially if later games' reoccurring motif of monsters from outer space striking Earth inside meteors can be factored in the broader cosmological picture. If so, then their whole planets of origin may have been torn apart. It is suggested, however, the conflict eventually moved to the opposite side. Ancient engravings in the inner chamber of Turnback Cave describe the distortion world as a place where life has faded, confirming it was once inhabited by lives now lost, evidently during the conflict. Some giants may have slipped back to the chaotic dimension, seeing how their comrades were being recklessly crushed, to which Arceus and Giratina chased them down. But it is also possible the spirit's army decided to invade the distortion world in order to get rid of the very roots of chaos once and for all. Cut content reiterates this idea stated. In 2020, sprites from an early build of Diamond and Pearl leaked online, allowing us to have a look at Generation 4 beta designs. Out of all of them, one obviously piques the attention. Giratina was completely absent, and in its place, in the Pokédex, was a scrapped legendary Pokemon whose name was supposed to be Chimerian, judging by Pokemon Battle Revolution internal naming system and later leaked materials. Its profile reveals this was supposed to be a ghost dragon phantom Pokemon, a fitting category for its description. Chimerian was a creature that lived long ago, now reborn to a new shape and howling in search of its lost companions. Its identity as one of the giants is evident, and perhaps it was intended to get a second chance due to its peculiar typing. It doesn't come as a shock that the origin of ghosts was hard to permanently kill.
Even its name and its design are revelatory of its nature of a chimera. From the mammalian body structure to the avian wing on its back, up to the Cthulhu reminiscent squid face, you could say this beast was a real mixture of everything. If the Chaos Seeker of Unity had ever taken a concrete shape, it would definitely look like Chimaeron. It's not by chance the Pokemon design was probably inspired by Hundun, the central and primordial chaos in Chinese mythology, and something that would come back when we look at the Treasures of Ruin in Paldea. Whether Giratina actually slew the Chimera in the heart of chaos during the conflict, or if the design is intended to be completely scrapped out of incompatibility with final ideas, the dimension was surely invaded at some point, killing all sentient lives lurking within it. And with that final cleansing, the Chaos World was torn to pieces, its unity breaking much like with the CP violation it is based on. It was likely at this point it took its current name, Distortion World, which is its localization of a name, which can instead be directly translated as Torn World, Shattered World, Defeated World, the first even used in the internal documentation being that Torn World. With the death of Chaos, the original one rewarded Giratina for its military service, bestowing to it the conquered dimension. It should be noted that all cut versions of the original story predate the existence of the Raging Avatar from a development standpoint. It was more than likely its addition that made them rethink the setting as a necessity. Poetically, when the Giants' plot was sidelined in development and Chimaeron was abandoned, the renegade Pokemon also dethroned the Chimera in the Pokédex. With the defeat of the Giants, the essences of types were now infused in the plates and passed under Arceus' domain. The multi-type ability allows the Alpha Pokemon to change its typology, matching the plate it holds, as it is referenced in the text of the Splash Plate. In English, directly stating, the rightful bearer of a plate draws from the plate it holds, and in Japan, or Japanese, the one holding the plates changes into many forms and releases their powers. Meanwhile, the metal plate fills us with the moment types were shared to other Pokemon. The implication would be for all the Pokemon pre-existing the war to be typeless, or all normal type at best, before the essences were given to the world. Which that makes me wonder, because long ago they were originally planning for animals to be a part of the Pokemon world, if normal animals were the normal type, and that when this event happened, theoretically at some point in time, the powers eventually split and were given, and Pokemon came into existence. Maybe this final breath of diversity is what made the Mew lurking on Earth so malleable, capable of evolving in all kinds of different creatures. But it also begs the question of those long predating the conflict and that we know to bear different attributes. In English, we get the powers of plates are shared among Pokemon. In Japanese, the powers of plates are distributed to Pokemon that are born. All cut mythology following the plot of multiple giants actually addressed this question, particularly in relation to Dialga and Palkia. According to the earlier scripts, Aya and Ea were only given bodies after the war, as Eos poured its own blood into the corpses of the defeated enemies in order to give them a new purpose. This is consistent with Chimaeron featuring a ghost dragon typing, the latter seemingly shared among the chaotic spawn while embodying at least another. Moreover, considering Dialga and Palkia also had to exist without a proper body in the current iteration of the canon, as they effectively predate physical matter. This piece of the puzzle never intentionally saw the light of day as giants became less and less relevant in the game's scenarios, but it may just work as well with the established mythos. The spirits of Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina always acted as forces of time, space, and rage respectively. It was only later that they found husks of flesh in the enemies they subjugated. Legends Arceus confirms their bodies were also morphed by their own volition, meaning that they created their own bodies. These spirits decided this is what I want to look like. And so Giratina assimilated Chimaeron types, while the other avatars, those of unnamed giants of steel and water. As for the Lake Trio and eventual ancient alien lifeforms, they must have gained their typology more indirectly. The Metal Plate does address that new powers were bestowed to those Pokemon which were born, so the hatchling of the Lake Trio's egg on Earth
may have also factored into their new psychic typing. And while old, typeless creatures started to die out, a new era of the universe was about to unfold. Multiversal Mayhem. Old verse 15 is a poem on the contemplation of the limitless concepts of time and space. While both realities are praised as unending in their spreading, the spirit is specifically compared to space. Not just our, like English localization claims, spirit is also space as a whole. In English, they state, the flow of time never stops. The past, future, and present. Space is ever expanding to dimensions. Our spirits, too, are as space. In Japanese, it states directly, time is something that doesn't stop. The past, the future, and the present. Space is the expansion of everything, and the spirit is also space. It is clear the writer is trying to express how existence feels more akin to Palkia's concept. Something in the never-ending expansion of space just seems more familiar and warmer compared to the unavoidable flow of the temporal river. The future, after all, brings aging and death. Would it be weird, then, for space itself to develop the deep desire of getting closer to the spirit? When we look at Palkia in its origin form, we get the text stating it soars across the sky in a form that greatly resembles the creator of all things. Perhaps this imitation of appearance is Palkia's strategy for gaining Arceus' powers. Legends Arceus has cast a shadow on Palkia's image. Prior to this game, the deity was always depicted on par with Dialga, really deprived of any sort of individual desires. But while the Avatar of Time always remains super partes in assuming a form akin to the original one, its counterpart is now described as shaping its physical vessel in the active attempt of getting closer to Arceus' appearance and powers. The spirit is also space, and opposite is true too. From the moment it gained a material vessel, Palkia tried to imitate the body from which it came from, and eventually it crossed the line. A comparison between the Pokédex entries of both the legendary Pokemon reveals how rooted is the fear for Palkia in Hisuian distant folklore compared to the simple reverence towards Dialga. For Dialga, this Pokemon is revered as a deity in Hisuian legend. For Palkia, this Pokemon is feared as a deity in Hisuian legend. This and the previous description settle the matter. At some point in time, Palkia tried to usurp Arceus' seat as the legitimate ruler of the world, which is honestly no surprise if that happened then, considering we see Giratina and Volo doing that then. Since the event was known to the ancient humans, to a point the god of space is still feared to these days. This undoubtedly occurred after the war against the giants. We are also past the point primitive humans lacked the spirit that will be brought by the Lake Trio's emergence from their arc, otherwise they wouldn't be able to recall a sentiment like fear. Still, the idea of Palkia seeking the spirit while also emulating its progenitor is suspicious without a proper trigger. Even if they weren't the main actors, it's highly unlikely Dialga and Palkia were ignorant about the giants, especially so if they are currently inhabiting their corpses. What could have the spatial deity thought at the idea of chaos making everything one again? Wouldn't that mean it could have finally become as the spirit, as the source of light it was so desperately trying to imitate? And so, while chaos was defeated as its own force, it was still able to persist in Palkia's mind like a parasite, tapping the darker regions of its consciousness. It never truly died. The ideas and concepts implanted into Palkia's mind now continue to live on in a new form, almost like reviving the corpse that it now inhabits. Perhaps it was a side effect of using the water dragon giant as a vessel, parts of its will and desires still soaking its brain like a tumor of an already predisposed spirit. Still, Palkia remained in silence, maybe resisting, maybe waiting for the right time to strike. It stood still until life on Earth flourished with all sorts of creatures. Then, it simply snapped. If it couldn't become as the creator, then it would expand its domain and engulf the creator. It would have taken the throne of the spirit up above, in the Hall of Origin. As we know, none of this was even accounted by any relevant ancient source. Palkia's rebellion was destined to fail at its dawn. The text for the blank plate reveals to us how this is the case. Three beings whose power can hold both time and space fixed. In Japanese, the three Pokemon have the power to stop space and time for a short while.
Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf were born in order to connect space and time and allow the material world to exist, but they also served another secret role. Inside their bodies, it lingers, the power to stop the two concepts, even if for a short while. We see this ourselves in Generation 4 games and in Legends Arceus, as both stories involve the creation of the Red Chain, in order to tame one of the legendary Pokemon. This artifact originates from the Lake Trio's bodies, even if the process of its manufacture differs between the different titles or versions. In Modern Sinnoh, Cyrus forces the extraction of the red crystals on the three deities' heads, as he writes in the reports on his computer. The Galactic Team boss notes how the Red Chain is not a power limiter, which is why the scientist is not interested in using Pokeballs for his plans. It controls the shackled mind, so that it can obey to the Master's command. Why such relic exists in the first place, if not out of fear an Avatar may go rogue? The documents directly state, according to myths, the Pokemon created Sinnoh with its power. However, capturing the Pokemon with a Pokeball prevents it from using its full power. But with the Red Chain, the Pokemon can be shackled, and its power can be used without restraint. The Pokemon of the Lakes and Mount Coronet are somehow connected. Capturing the Pokemon of the Lakes will free the Pokemon of Mount Coronet. From the Pokemon of the Lakes, crystals can be extracted to create a Red Chain. Using that Red Chain, the mythical Pokemon can be summoned and shackled to do as we command. Indeed, Kogita is also aware of the Red Chain, and even for a woman so knowledgeable of a 2 millennium-old civilization, the stories around it are mere legends. If anything, this confirms the item was used in the most distant past of humanity at least once. In the Hisuian title, the Red Chain is crafted after we retrieve an Azelf's Fang, a Mesprit's Plume, and the Uxie's Claw from their respective Pokemon. But this appears more to be a ritual to prove us worthy rather than a list of ingredients. The three still have to manifest the chain by themselves at the end of our quest. Even the requirements are nonsensical, the Lake Trio lacking of evident fangs, plumes, and claws to begin with, likely a nod to Gleipnir of Norse mythology, a legendary iron rope which could only be crafted by gathering impossible materials. Dialogue goes as follows. Azelf's Fang, Mesprit's Plume, Uxie's Claw. So the legend told is true. Then the Red Chain must be real as well. I know the old words and what they bid us do. How true they are isn't mine to know, and regardless of their truth, I am bound to pass them on. How callous of my ancestors, to leave their legends to their children without a single thought for the hardship it would cause them. But here we are. More importantly, the Sinnohan lady also reveals us the Red Chain's real functioning. While the English renders it as mind, Kogita speaks of the lack of spirit specifically, reaffirming the world couldn't exist without someone perceiving it. It's like if a tree falls in the forest, doesn't make noise, except if no one perceives the world, can it truly have spirit type logic. But the Red Chain is able to cut through this veil of subjectiveness, tearing apart every form of individuality. This is what the minds of Palkia and Dialga go through when shackled. They witness the truth. They, even if just for a short while, as when time and space are stopped, return to the turmoil of chaos before creation. And how do they react? Other than being stunned in confusion. If the space Pokemon ever desired the regain of primordial unity, showing what that truly would have meant was sufficient to extinguish its ambition. Without the mind, were the rift to widen and the very worlds to end, would we even know it? One might even say the world's time, space, all creation exists only because our minds are there to perceive it. Perhaps the Red Chain's purpose is to let one see creation as it truly is. Even if the rogue avatar was tamed, a countermeasure was required so that history would not repeat itself. As the official website alludes to, the space world was at some point shattered, torn in infinite ribbons. This likely references Palkia's signature move, Spatial Rend, otherwise directly translated as Subspace Tear, which is able to tear the foe along with the space around it. The attack alone is proof of Palkia's more belligerent nature, with Dialga's Roar of Time being only able to distort time without tearing it apart, despite having more base power than its counterpart mechanics-wise. Which is an interesting subversion of their original personalities as Aya and Aya. They also say that the very space in the world where origin form Palkia resides in is in shreds, as if it had been torn to ribbons. The space world being torn to ribbons shows spatial rend was used multiple times in Palkia's domain, in a manner it doesn't seem physiological. This shattering could potentially be traced back to the period the god of space went rogue in, either as a mindless act of a creature tainted by chaos, or as a form of punishment by Arceus itself, which is also able to learn spatial rend through dedicated events. Be it as it may, many independent bubbles started to expand as their own from the realm of Palkia. Whether they were there from the beginning, or they are indeed a result of the rebellion, this multitude of space worlds may have been the basis for the multiverse to exist. Connecting the existence of multiple universes to space specifically is consistent with what we know of multiversal travels. Despite worlds are made both of time and space, it is through the latter that we can move from one another. Hoopa specifically distorts space with its rings, and we have no evidence time-manipulating Pokemon can cross the same boundaries besides Terapagos' convergence, which involves space as well. All the primordial deity needed for division to further spread was to give a time world and a distortion world to each self-expanding dimensions of Palkia, and respective avatars to each one of them, meaning that every single dimension would have, if I'm understanding this properly, a Palkia and a Dialga. And if this seems too much even for an all-encompassing god, the inscription of the legend plate confirms us only one entity watches over the totality of the multiverse. In English, from all creations, over all creations, does the original one watch over all. In Japanese, the being itself sees Pokemon and people in every universe. Naturally, relating the rebellion of Palkia to the existence of multiple universes is speculation. These separate continuities may have existed since well before, but the problem remains that the events of creation must pertain to a single original one. Where was the first divergence then? From which point could you posit the single original story turned into more original stories? And when new universes are born, do the events of creation reoccur as described in the mythos? How to reconcile this with the existence of a sole demiurge overlooking all? No concrete answers are given, and this is likely because Sinnoh mythology was conceived without these questions in mind. The multiverse will be only established as a viable tool in later iterations, and all fail to harmonize the genesis in a complete and satisfactory way. All we can do in the wait for more concrete answers is to search for the best point for this multiversal conundrum to start. At last, it rested. Be it the war against the giants or the creation of infinite universes, a considerable portion of the original one's powers was eventually consumed. To that effect, the Skyplate addresses one of the last accounted acts performed by the god. In English, the being poured the remains of its power into stone and buried it deep. In Japanese, the being itself put fragments of its power into orbs and buried them in the ground. Despite the localization rendering this as stone, the term Tama is consistently used for orbs. Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina all possess an origin form manifesting when the Pokemon linger in their dimensions. When they visit the material world, their shape changes and their powers are contained, resulting in their altered forms. While the term is only officially used for Giratina, the concept behind it is the same for all three. For the Renegade Pokemon, this process is mentioned in the Iron Plate, although the English translation completely obfuscates its meaning. In English, it states, "That which fills the other side of the world can shape the rage and mold it." In Japanese, the being which fills the opposite side of the world changes its form. Special orbs hold the condensed powers of the space, time, and the distortion worlds, allowing the three avatars to manifest their origin forms even outside of their realms. Initially born out of the original one as a last division of its remaining forces, these orbs were then buried down the earth by the god. Leaked script implies some were hidden even before the emergence of mankind. Given that Arceus' power was put into these artifacts, it's even possible to infer their materials to originate from the body of the giants they are inhabiting, explaining why each resonate with a particular deity. I personally thought that was relating to, or this last plate was related to the plates themselves being put onto the planet, but this would actually make far more sense. In particular, the artifact's Japanese names are actually a reference to Generation 4 games titles. The Adamant Crystal of Dialga is a Great Diamond Orb. The illustrious globe of Palkia is a Great Pearl Orb. And finally, the Grisius core of Giratina is actually called the Great Platinum Orb. These were probably the sheer forms of the minerals, but with time going by, some eventually got polished and lost part of their power, which is why the Adamant Orb, the Lustrous Orb, and some Grisius Orbs can't trigger any shapeshift. While this difference was only canonized in Legends Arceus, internal documents dating back to Generation 4 show plans for lesser orbs to be mineable in the undergrounds, likely cut because of their redundancy and the lack of a proper gameplay functionality. In the case of Dialga and Palkia, some may have even been later produced by their own flesh and blood. The two dragons feature diamonds and pearls respectively in their designs, and confidential documents reveal those to be essential to their physiology. Dialga's gem embedded on its chest captures light, which is then carried in the rest of its body through the reflection via crystalline, tubular vessels. This process gives energy to the deity, and the diamond equally serves as a lid to contain the power harvested within. Due to its mineral-based diet, its body eventually became covered in metal-like structures that have formed from fluids oozing from within. Are you telling me that this was confirming that Dialga does have an actual diet? Like, don't get me wrong, I know we see it drinking water in one shot, again, the Sky Warrior movie, but having those old documents tell us, hey, yeah, the avatars of these gods do need to consume stuff, or just generally consume stuff. Possibly some were spilled on the ground before condensing into diamond clusters. At the same time, Palkia's pearls were said to be the byproduct of toxins and wastes, encapsulated in a mix of proteins and calcium. Periodically, the spheres detach from its shoulders and they grow too big, and such orbs were often retrieved by humans who revered them as sacred artifacts. While on the topic of minerals associated with primordial creatures, it can't be ignored how the original one is also associated with a sacred stone. The description of the origin ore, introduced in Legends Arceus, confirms an affinity with the creator, although its crystals are tinged in red instead of the usual green associated with the alpha Pokemon. Oh wait, hold on. That's what I thought it was. I thought it was the red ores, not the plates. I think originally I thought it was the plates, and then in the most recent, way that I started learning about this, I thought it was the ores, or the red ores that make, or the origin ore, whatever. I'm moving on and continuing with the script. I'm making a mess of myself. An ore of mysterious power, spoken of in ancient myths and said to contain the power of Almighty Sinnoh itself. A possible explanation would be for this ore to actually be part of the original one before it externalized itself in the current Arceus. That being the case, the green jewels may have originally been more reddish in color, mirroring the ones embedded on the Lake Trio's heads. This would also imply the mineral was sent on the planet in primordial times, well before the other orbs. Since it is only found on Mount Coronet, it may have even arrived along with the quote-unquote spear, which made the first mountain arise. The reddish motif associated with the original one was actually present since Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, Explorers of Time and Explorers of Darkness. The Coronet rock we can find in-game was said to come from Mount Coronet, only much later contextualized as a crystal of the sacred ore. The presence of the scarlet ore may even be the reason behind the area's peculiar characteristics. According to Old Verse 16, stones born out of divine power that gathered on the mountain are what generates the strong magnetic field permeating the whole region. While localization completely omits the object of the distortion, the poem makes clear that the stones made from the original one's power gather on Mount Coronet, which is to say the origin ore, are able to bend the magnetic field, quote-unquote, around the mountain. This is why Magneton and Nosepass could only evolve in Coronet's proximity, the Pokédex stating they need to bathe in the special flux in order to change their forms since Generation 4. In English, the poem says, Heaven's crown nearest to Almighty Sinnoh, power of Almighty Sinnoh, gather a stone at Heaven's mount, stone, let your power flow, distort and bend the world around you. In Japanese, Mountain of Heaven, the place close to Almighty Sinnoh. The power of Almighty Sinnoh gathers on the Mountain of Heaven and becomes stone. The stone emits power, and it distorts the magnetic field around. The presence of the ore makes the presence of the original one tangible, even to these days, even if its involvement in mortal affairs will considerably decrease after the orbs were buried. In fact, with this final note, the original story truly comes to an end. The last passage reads of how Arceus, the days of creation having reached their conclusion, went to a deep state of sleep,
presumably in the attempt to slowly regain its powers. The world created, the original one took to unyielding sleep, and in Japanese, as the world was created, the first being went to sleep, which is very much like, and on the seventh day, God rested. Excluding minor and more questionable parentheses, this slumber will last hundreds of thousands of years, only to be interrupted by a man who managed to step his feet on the Hall of Origin. In the meantime, humans found themselves in a world devoid of God, and civilization sprouted in the wake of such abandonment. But before unraveling those stories, it is necessary to take some steps back, to get a closer look to some key points in the cosmology, from the identity of the defeated giants to the emergence of life on the planet, up to investigating the truths behind mankind's very dawn. And that is the end of Boltoy's first article. It's a beautiful thing. I have learned so much, and I hope you have too, by all means. And I cannot express enough just how much I loved this and how much I thank Boltoy for allowing me to read this and to share this with you. Please do yourself a favor, go follow Boltoy on their, on where they publish their articles. They put so much work into this, they put so much quality work into this, and at the very least, it's all free, and you should do your part by subscribing to their articles so that every single time they release something, you get told about it. Maybe if this video does really well and Boltoy is still okay with it, I'll go ahead and talk with him about doing the Age of Giants and talking about the Age of Giants, because that sounds incredibly exciting, and it's arguably another piece that I'm very excited for, while also knowing that Boltoy specifically states early on in that article that it is, at minimum, a huge obsession of his. So, with that then, I hope you did enjoy. Make sure that you do subscribe for weekly content. Gallery Ecology is next. I'm saying it right now. Gallery Ecology is next, okay? So that's going to be a huge undertaking. Please bear with me. Make sure that you do share this video. Tell me your thoughts in the comments. All of that helps boost the channel, especially as YouTube's algorithm has kind of flipped a lot of things on its head for a lot of creators. Yours truly also is not exempt from that. So, again, subscribe, and if you'd like to go the extra mile, become a member of the channel for as little as $3 a month. It means the world, and goes the extra mile, and helps make sure that the channel stays stable while I continue to work on the next video. Thank you to all of our members of the channel. I appreciate you immensely. Thank you for watching, and as always, don't do anything I want to do. Don't do anything I would do. Please be nice to each other. I love you, and I'll see you next time.